Welcome. Oh my goodness. Let me disconnect that. I always do that. I always have the wrong sound system set up when I start. There we are. Much better. Hey, welcome back. Imagine having a supernatural power on your side to help you get through each day. This episode of Second Breakfast is brought to you by your higher power. Your higher power is free and ready to tap into at any time. The only cost, of course, will be your honesty. I use my higher power every day to pray for others and to ask for help. But most of all, I use my higher power to give thanks. Give thanks always. Live in gratitude. You will be amazed at the changes in your life if you allow yourself this eternal free service. We'll be right back after the intro to talk about a few of these items in here and a few other things. So please come on back. See you there. Bye-bye. And we're back. Outstanding. Let me minimize this. There we go. Hey, I hope your day is going wonderfully. It was not as enough rain last night. Not that much, really. Soil is still damp. And as you can see here, we are quite busy with the garden. Indeed, the gardening channel is up. We are posting every single day over, there we go, gardening channel. You can catch up on the growth of the garden. Things are finally starting to come through the soil. It's exciting. All right, let's get straight into our first story here. Now, Bill C-22. As you know, the U.S. is not happy, and neither are some companies that have to open their back doors to basically the government and start collecting data on every single Canadian, and so that it just sits there a full year, just so the government can come in and say, hey, we'd like to look at this now. So basically treating every single Canadian like a criminal just waiting to do a crime so that the police can look into you and then find you guilty of something. Here's Public Safety Canada posting, all G7 Five Eye partners and most EU countries have lawful access frameworks that include technical obligations for electronic service providers. Guess what? So does Canada. Canada already had that before Bill C-22. It was called Get a Warrant. That's basically all it was. Get a warrant, and then you can get the information. But no, that's not enough. And of course, readers have added context. They thought people might want to know because, well, the Liberal government is all about gaslighting Canadians into saying that what they're doing is for your safety, to make you feel better, right? So here's the context. The EU Court of Justice has ruled twice that the general and indiscriminate mandatory data retention by service providers is unlawful, meaning most EU countries lack equivalent frameworks to Bill C-22's metadata retention requirements. That means you lied. Indeed, you lied again. You lie like a rug. You always do. Always do. Right? And of course, Mario's laying good here with a post saying, fact check, only communist China and Russia have this. As for the EU, the community note has correctly addressed our misinformation. The EU court has ruled against what you are proposing twice. Twice. And of course, Gary, our justice minister, he wasn't born in Canada, so he does not have the same values and ethics as a Canadian would, who grew up here in Canada, who understands freedom. The Liberals don't understand freedom. They only want control, right? Everything you know about Mark Carney's Bill C-22. Let us watch this short video by Eli Continental. Set this up.
Bill C-22, also known as the Lawful Access Act. This is a piece of legislation that critics say would enable the Mark Carney government to have expanded surveillance powers. And I'll be honest, when I first read through this bill and read some of the commentary about this bill, I couldn't believe it. I actually had to read it twice because of how insane some of the propositions are. But yet here we are. Now, the Liberals argue this bill is necessary for national security reasons, but critics warn that this bill goes much further. So, according to the bill and analysis on the bill from the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Bill C-22 would require companies that provide electronic services to create technical capabilities to allow easy access to private data for law enforcement and Canadian Security Intelligence Services Act, or CSIS agents, allow the government to require companies to collect metadata, such as the location of your devices for up to a year, allow the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, in consultation with the Information Commissioner, to order secret spying on Canadians, allow the Minister of Public Safety to order companies to break encryption, which is basically break privacy. Josh DeHaas, who's the interim litigation director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation and a guest on today's podcast, argues that the bill would create the infrastructure for a modern surveillance state. And privacy expert David Fraser has warned that the bill would allow the government to turn on any electronic devices, such as smartphones, smart TVs, and even smart fridges, into listening devices, and to do so secretly. And amidst concerns about backdoors that would break encryption, companies like Signal, which offers a very private messaging platform, as well as VPN providers like NordVPN, have said they would have to pull out of Canada if this bill passes. All of this is so serious that the Americans have now put Mark Carney on notice. Republicans Jim Jordan, chair of the U.S. Judiciary Committee, and Brian Mast, who oversees the Foreign Affairs Committee, have argued that Bill C-22 would drastically expand Canada's surveillance and data access powers in ways that would create significant risks to the security and data privacy of Americans, and that American companies operating in Canada would face a difficult choice: compromising the security of their entire user base, including U.S. citizens, or risking exclusion from the Canadian market, and that either outcome harms U.S. national security and economic interests by undermining trust in American technology and inviting reciprocal demands from other nations. To call this concerning is an understatement. And quite frankly, if this bill passes, it will not end well.
Well, we have seen that the Liberals are not concerned with what ends well or what doesn't in Canada. They are only concerned with what enriches themselves and their friends, and they will lie through their teeth to do it. Speaking of enriching themselves and their friends, let's listen to Michael Cooper.
To the table, so whoever wishes to answer is fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll address my questions to the table, so whoever wishes to answer is fine. MPs are explicitly forbidden from benefiting from expenses that they charge to the House of Commons, correct? Okay. That is precisely what MP Lori Idlout did when she expensed the House of Commons for gifts she purchased from a company in which she is the sole proprietor Carvings Nunavut. She did so not once, not twice, but on 4 separate occasions with a total value of purchases of $1,756, which she charged to taxpayers. Ms. Idlout says that she has since repaid the money. On what date was the money repaid?
I don't have that date specifically.
My recollection, it was several days after. Paul, do you know? I don't have a specific date. We'll look as we continue with the questions, and we'll come back to that.
Well, my colleague, Mr. Barrett, wrote to the Speaker as Chair of the Board of Internal Economy on March 14, 2026, to raise these inappropriate charges. Was the repayment after that letter?
Yes.
Okay, so she repaid the money only after she got caught effectively pocketing the money. When a member submits an office expense claim over $1,000 to the House of Commons, the member must personally approve the claim, correct?
That's my understanding. That's what I do.
Okay, that is correct. And on August 27, 2025, Ms. Idlout made a $1,380 purchase from her own company, which was then submitted to the House of Commons for reimbursement. So to confirm, Ms. Idlout would have had to have approved that $1,380 claim, correct?
It would be logical to assume that, yes.
Okay. Now, I would just observe in closing, Mr. Chair, that Ms. Idlout claims that these charges were made in error. It simply doesn't add up, that assertion, given the fact that there was a $1,380 claim that she would have had to have personally approved. She may have also personally approved the 3 other purchases. She knew exactly what she was doing. She signed off on the claim. She billed taxpayers and thought she could get away with it. And it was only after she got caught did she turn around and pay the money back. Her assertion bears no credibility.
And the last comment's right there. Exactly, right? That there is no credibility. No credibility whatsoever in anything the Liberals do. Here's a post by Andy Lee. I hear Brookfield secured $1.9 billion in refinancing from the Qatar Investment Authority a few days ago. Also, while you were there, small world, nice haul, right? And we knew it. We knew that when he went to Qatar, it's always because of Brookfield. Everywhere Carney has gone and used our taxpayer money to fly himself around the planet, the Liberal supporters will always say, oh, it's because, he's getting us deals and everything. No. It's been exposed several times. Everywhere he goes, there's a Brookfield connection somewhere, and they, of course, make some moolah out of everything. Everything Mark Carney does enriches himself and his friends. Now, here we go into a next story here. This is very good news. Here's a post by Jonathan Kay. Richard Warman, a director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, sued me and Barbara Kay after we pointed out that the CAN, Canadian Anti-Hate Network, was a cheerleader for Antifa thugs. We won our case. Warman paid our costs. Bernie Farber became a laughingstock. Now CAN is losing its funding. Gee, what a shame. And of course, he reposts a post by Holly Doan here from Blacklock saying, access to information. Activist group is out of Canadian heritage funding after being accused of bias. Canadian Anti-Hate Network received just under $700,000 in taxpayer funding until MPs question its role in spurring greater polarization. Indeed. And their website is still up, so let's go to that. Anti-Hate Network. There we go. There's their site. And if we go to About Us, let's bring this up a little bigger. Apparently, they tout themselves as a high-quality information to inspire independent advocacy and activism to disrupt and compete with far-right movements. There you go right there. Their bias is right on their site. It's not about the truth. It's about fighting the far right. We accomplish this by publishing news, investigations, and analysis, by creating toolkits, guides, and conducting workshops, and by speaking with policymakers and journalists. Since 2018, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network has watched and warned about the rise of far-right movements in Canada that harbor racism and other forms of hate and are incompatible with our multicultural and pluralistic democracy. Well, as we've seen, the people that they support, that being the Liberals, have pretty well instituted racism right in policy, making some people more equal than others. And the fact that you keep going on about the far right, looks like you already have a bias into who you are supposed to hate. You're actually directing hatred towards a certain political ideology instead of actually promoting rapprochement. We work towards a world in which these far-right movements are made irrelevant and do not have the strength or political power to discriminate against, harass, or threaten us or our neighbors. Well, that's enough of that. We go back to the story from Jonathan Kay. It looks like, they were cheerleaders for people who were actual thugs. Now, here's more from Jonathan Kay. In 2019, I was sued for libel by director of antihate.ca. He claimed that Barbara Kay and I linked Han to violent Antifa. Judgment released today. Claim dismissed. Judge Han does not assist Antifa. And Han, director, has used courts to stifle detractors, though failed in this case. Let's bring up the image here. The evidence disclosed that Khan did in fact assist Antifa and that the movement has been violent. The K's submission, which I accept, is that a human rights network like Khan, arguably, except in the most extreme circumstances, should not support a violent movement. Yeah, you think? And to do so, to most reasonable observers, would not be a good look. Yeah, not a good look indeed, right? While Warman is well known as a righteous crusader against white supremacy. A righteous crusader. Righteous in whose eyes, buddy? Against white supremacy and right-wing racist hate, and has been recognized and appropriately lauded for his work. He is also a controversial figure, and I accept the evidence of the case that he has used litigation to silence or intimidate those he sees as his critics, or who oppose his methods of prosecuting hate groups. Again, the fact that they're calling them hate groups already presupposes that they're already guilty of something, when that has yet to be proven. Then again, the label of hatred seems to be something that Khan bandies about quite a lot. If you want to know who these people are, well, their pictures are right on here. There's the Bernie Farber he's talking about here. He has a long history of grifting the anti-hate system. And this fella here, Mr. Warman, he has a bit of a reputation in the past going after the so-called basement Nazis. If you look back in his activities in the human rights tribunals and how he was making money through that, well, find out your own information. Oh, let's go back here to Mr. K. Here we go, Jonathan K. Wow, Bernie, isn't it incredible that your picture your friend in Ottawa at the occupation sent you is identical to the photo posted on Twitter 2 weeks ago by someone in Miami, right down to the ceramic design in the background. Yeah. I know, but that was an old post before. But yeah, so they will grift and do whatever they can. I'm glad they were exposed. And speaking of people going after other people for manufactured hate, as we know, Tamara has been targeted and for just being a political dissident. She spent more time in jail than a lot of people doing actual real violence in our communities are spending in jail these days. After suffering the longest and most aggressively prosecuted mischief trial in Canadian history, Tamara Lich is now suing the police and Crown for malicious prosecution and negligent investigation. Very good. What goes around comes around. She was found guilty of mischief for her role in the 2022 Freedom Convoy in Ottawa and given an 18-month conditional sentence, including 100 hours of community service and 12 months of house arrest, followed by 6 months of curfew. A condition of her pre-trial release was zero contact with other convoy organizers, although she had been granted permission to attend an award ceremony where other organizers would be provided she was in the company of her lawyer, which she was. Despite this, a photo was taken at the event of her with another convoy organizer, which brought about an immediate Canada-wide warrant for breaching bail conditions. She was quickly arrested and transported back in shackles to Ottawa, where she was held without bail until her trial. Imagine that for mischief, held in shackles. All the money they spent on her just to make her an object of derision, to keep this concept of, MAGA and freedomers and anti-freedom protest and all that BS. Tamara Lich had no prior criminal history and constantly promoted peaceful assembly throughout the convoy protest, a fact acknowledged by the courts. By pursuing maximum penalties against nonviolent organizers like herself and Chris Barber, while typical mischief cases result in far less, authorities have effectively weaponized the justice system to chill dissent. Compare this to countless recent reports of repeat violence offenders being released with a slap on the wrist, and it's easy to see that she was being made an example of. This isn't just about me, Lich stated. It's about stopping this kind of abuse so no Canadian ever faces it again. Her lawsuit seeks to reaffirm that the Charter stands above all, protecting peaceful protests, fair protests, and equal application of the rule of law. Our Charter is not ambiguous on these matters. If we do not correct the actions of our government and judiciary now and demand accountability, those willing will continue their efforts to suppress our rights and freedoms. Of course, and we have seen this right now with Bill C-22. They will stop at nothing at all, to get what they want. Now, if you may have heard, there was a shooting at a mosque down in the States, and I wasn't going to report on that initially. Wait till the information comes out, and of course, the truth always comes out. Just in from here, Nick Sortor. On X, San Diego police are flat out refusing to name yesterday's mosque's shooters. Why, you ask? Because it was a trans couple. California leftists are actively covering up trans violence. Well, is this true? We will see. We will see if this is true. But seeing as that more and more of this seems to be a pattern of those who are transitioning to a different gender than what they were born with, well, let's not get into that right now. There we go. So, get into our stuff that we couldn't cover yesterday. We were in a bit of a hurry to get to an appointment yesterday, and as well, I was having a lot of choppiness issues. I did another adjustment here while we were broadcasting because we were having a slight choppiness while showing Coop doing his piece in committee. And so far, it seems to be working a little better. Right? How's my drop frames? 649. All right, so remember the COVIDity stupidity. A lot of people want to forget it. Many of us will never forget it until we see justice for all the abuse and misery and deaths that it has caused. 6 years ago, this beautiful mother, sister, and daughter, Stephanie Warrior, was taken from her family. Hospital security in Toronto restrained her in a waiting room because her mask was down while she fought for air with COPD. She never woke up. This is what the government fear and mask mandates did to people. I remember seeing that video. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. The way they abused her and held her down. And why? because she wasn't wearing a mask, because she wasn't following the rules. These bureaucratic rules that absolutely do nothing. And if you think a surgical mask is going to protect you from breathing in pathogens, you are touched. You have been brainwashed. Take it from somebody who's had to wear personal protective equipment on and off for 38 years in Canadian Armed Forces. And it didn't start just in the Air Force, where as part of my trade, I actually had to do regular fit tests on the equipment that I wear. But no, it started back in the infantry during nuclear biochemical warfare training. Anybody can tell you then from that training that your little surgical mask is not going to protect you. So stop thinking that it's going to protect you. All you're doing is preventing yourself from spitting on other people, and you're actually increasing the amount of CO2 that you're breathing into your body. Minute amounts, but it builds up over time. You're actually reducing the amount of oxygen coming into your face because you're covering up your cake hole. Shocking. The pots are being uncovered here, says DeGeneres. The prestigious biologist Brett Weinstein confesses in an interview with Tucker Carlson, considered today as one of the journalists with the greatest broadcasting power on the planet, that 17 million people were killed by the COVID vaccines. Now, I posted the data link before from another doctor stating that it was around 189,000 Canadians that were killed by the COVID-19 vaccine here in Canada during the injections. Got to remember, when people hear that, they go, oh, you're crazy. Well, why were you not considered completely vaccinated until 2 weeks after your second shot? So anybody that died while getting their first shot and while getting their second shot, but before that 2 weeks expired, you were not considered vaccinated. So if you died during that time, they usually relegated the deaths. Oh, another COVID death. Into the pot it goes. Shocking scientific report claimed that instead of saving lives, the experimental COVID vaccines were causally linked to drastic increase in all-cause mortality in 17 countries, ultimately causing 17 million deaths. The report, published by Correlation Research in the Public Interest on September 17, 2023, quantified the vaccine dose fatality rate, the VFDR, across all ages, which measures the proportion of vaccine-induced deaths relative to the total number of vaccines administered to the population. And those have been added. Wake up. They killed us and intended to keep going. No more Gates and his genetically manipulated insects. No more vaccines, no more lockdowns ever again. The impulse of the awakening has begun. Let's watch some of this video.
The COVID crisis. And so there was a lot of work trying to unpack what we actually understand. And I saw a credible estimate of something like 17 million deaths globally from this technology. So
17 million deaths from the COVID vax?
Well, when you scale up to billions, it's not hard to reach a number like that with a technology this dangerous. Now, to your deeper question, I think let's steel man.
So just for perspective, I mean, that's like the death toll of a global war.
Yes, absolutely. This is a great tragedy of history. So that proportion. And amazingly, there is no way in which it's over. I mean, we are still apparently recommending these things for healthy children. Never stood any chance of getting any benefit from them. Every chance of suffering harms that are not only serious, but tragic on the basis that children have long lives ahead of them. If you ruin a child's immune system in youth, they have to spend the rest of their presumably shortened life in that state. So it never made any sense that we were giving this to kids in the first place. The fact that we're still doing it when the emergency, to the extent there even was one, is clearly over. And when there's never been any proper justification of administering it to healthy kids. It just, healthy kids don't die of COVID. And the shot doesn't prevent you from catching or transmitting it. So there was just literally no justification.
Well, I seem to be having a problem every time I expand video right now. My frames drop, and we get a little choppiness. Wow, look at the amount of frames that dropped. Let's not do that again today. Here we have Tom Quiggin. Another reason to defund the CBC. The CBC tries to shut down lawsuit by detective who probed infant vaccines deaths. Indeed. Some more on this, I believe. Nope. Now, if you're not aware, Detective Helen Bruce, she's the one that started looking into infant deaths. She wasn't investigating the vaccine. She was investigating the deaths. And then her investigations led her to the cause, which seems to be aimed at the vaccines that the mothers were taking. And because that went against a political narrative, she continues to be politically persecuted in her job. And as a result now, these boards have come out and said, oh, no cop is allowed to investigate something unless their boss says it's okay to. So the old preset where cops used to be able to investigate anything and everything because that was part of their job to protect society, now they have all been politicized. All of them. Well, you can't investigate anything. So imagine that. So all the corrupt politicians are getting away with everything now because, they can't even investigate them because they have to run it by their boss first. And here we have Valerie Ann Smith. The vaccine inserts are blank. Let's go back to this piece right here, shall we?
This, inserts for the vaccine. Paper's there, and there's nothing printed on it. I find that very interesting, disheartening, disgusting, and lots of other words. But then it gets better. It just keeps, wait, there's more. It just keeps happening. The CDC redacts every single word of a 148-page study on a myocarditis after COVID vaccination. So I asked research to print the study for me. 148 pages. The entire thing is redacted. What good does a study do if there's nothing there? Then I want to know, wait, what might have been there that they needed to redact it? That's even scarier.
We're witnessing an active cover-up of a colossal consumer product safety debacle that is basically affecting the entire world. Mm-hmm. So in the United States, our CDC, National Institutes of Health, and the FDA are actively involved in a cover-up. And the same is occurring in the UK with the MHRA, Europe with European medicine agencies, and Australia with the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Something is going on that's very big. Each one of these companies that puts out a product has an obligation to produce 90 days of safety monitoring after their product comes out. It's a regulatory dossier. If somebody has a problem with the new product and they call the company like Pfizer, Pfizer has to report, write down what happened, and they have to collate that in a report and produce it and make it publicly available. When it came to 90 days with Pfizer, the first vaccine that came out, remember Pfizer was approved December 10th, 2020, Pfizer didn't produce a report. And then people started asking, well, what's happening with your vaccine? And Pfizer would not disclose what happened. And then it went to court. And the lawyer for the FDA stepped in and said they don't want to release Pfizer's dossier for 55 years. 55 years. And the plaintiff pushed. And finally, slowly, the Pfizer dossier came out. Pfizer recorded 1,223 deaths with their product within 90 days of release. People were calling Pfizer in desperation, watching their family members die after taking the vaccine. Pfizer recorded over 1,200 new adverse events, new problems that Dr. Bowden has talked to you about that we are grappling with the entire time. But the point is, our FDA worked to cover this up. The FDA should be regulating this company. FDA should have been having at least monthly meetings and fully disclosing what was going on with these novel vaccines, which are a genetic transfer technology platform. It's the first time human beings had ever been injected with foreign genetic material in world history. Now they were getting it full on 2/3 of the world's population took these.
And there's more information. Here's Valerie Ann Smith here. For daring to speak the truth, I was arrested by the FBI, thrown into a cell, branded a terrorist by my own government. Let's listen to her state this information.
An abstract for me. It's been really personal. For daring to this journey wasn't an abstract for me. It's been really personal. For daring to speak the truth, I was arrested by the FBI, thrown into a cell, branded a terrorist by my own government. My teenage son, who was asleep in his bed in Los Angeles on January 6th, was followed by the TSA agents. He too was put on this watch list. My bank accounts were flagged. My reputation was attacked. And I was sentenced by a system that knew the accusations were false but refused to correct them. I don't know if you've seen the news in the last couple of days, but it's been absolutely confirmed that there were hundreds of undercover informants from the FBI present on January 6th. You know how they said, oh, there's none, and then they're like, oh, well, there's 2, or maybe there's 5. Yeah, no, the FBI so far has said that there's hundreds. So I tell this story in my book, Selective Persecution, the Legalization of American Fascism, and I did not write it as a pundit. I wrote it as a witness. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone. This journey wasn't an abstract for me. It's been really personal. For daring to speak the truth, I was arrested by the FBI, thrown into a cell, branded a terrorist by my own government. My teenage son, who was asleep in his bed in Los Angeles on January 6th, was followed by the TSA agents. He too was put on this watch list. My bank accounts were flagged. My reputation was attacked. And I was sentenced by a system that knew the accusations were false but refused to correct them. I don't know if you've seen the news in the last couple of days, but it's been absolutely confirmed that there were hundreds of undercover informants from the FBI present on January 6th. You know how they said, oh, there's none, and then they're like, oh, well, there's 2, or maybe there's 5. Yeah, no, the FBI so far has said that there's hundreds. So I tell this story in my book, Selective Persecution, the Legalization of American Fascism, and I did not write it as a pundit. I wrote it as a witness. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone. This journey was...
Now we see, of course, our own form of fascism happening in Canada, don't we? With this Bill C-22. Now, if you haven't heard, we're going to get into the ticks right after this. Here's a post by Liz Churchill. This is in Munster sitcom. It's bioterrorism horror movie. Yes, his literal last name is Munster. He's under FBI investigation for smuggling an Ebola-like virus into Montana from Africa. He's a verified Fauci foot soldier, they say. Let's listen. Well, sadly, the choppiness has gotten, even after all the adjustments we made. It was working fine last week, and then all of a sudden, the adjustments don't mean anything. The red-headed libertarian says, how do they know where the ticks are headed? Here reposting, a wave of ticks is headed for Ontario. Here's what one scientist says you can do to protect yourself. Indeed, how do they know where the ticks are headed? What the hell is going on? Well, we have Canadian whistleblower drops a bombshell. A worker for a private charter company in Ontario claims they're paid huge money to fly small planes and aerial disperse millions of ticks across specific regions twice a year, early in spring and early fall. This year, they switched to deer ticks specifically bred to withstand cold temperatures. The company receives the ticks in boxes, each containing millions, and drops them from single or dual prop aircraft with one pilot and one dispersal handler on board. The post was made in mid-March, weeks before the story exploded. While our government floods the country with immigration, crushes the middle class, spends billions overseas, this is happening in Ontario? When will millions find this inner strength and demand answers? Indeed. So let's listen to this thing right here, and we'll probably have another choppiness issue. Even though all the adjustments I'm making don't seem to be making any dent in this.
So this forum post, and I'm going to put it directly on the screen, and I'm going to read it word for word. It says this, quote, "I work for a private charter company in Ontario, Canada. The company handles booking and chartering flights across Ontario mainly. We are paid to spread ticks by air. It happens twice a year, early spring and early fall. This year, we've been hired to do it earlier. The company receives the ticks in boxes. Each box contains millions of ticks. The aircraft used are generally single or dual prop aircraft, single pilot, and one other passenger that handles the dispersal. It pays a lot, and I mean a lot. Generally, the ticks are dispersed in several specific regions in Ontario, and it's always the same regions each and every year, thus far. Last spring, the ticks dispersed were mostly American dog ticks. This year, they are all deer ticks, supposedly specifically bred to withstand cold temperatures." End quote. So that post was from March 16th, 2 weeks before Snopes said that this story originated. All right, and it's pretty interesting. Here we have a whistleblower saying that they are paid to disperse ticks across Canada. Now, this sounds eerily familiar to what we're hearing about these boxes of ticks that are being found. And it begs the question, was this person telling the truth?
Well, I can tell you. So from having been a silly bugger in the bush, which is what we used to call ourselves whenever we would go out and do exercises in the infantry, that crawl around in the bush, we didn't have this problem. You know, the ticks were something that you experienced out in Manitoba, where you sent your people to do escape and evasion training, where they would have to do like daily tick checks on each other, even though they're supposed to be independent, but they would have to meet up with each other and then check each other out because, you know, you can't check your own back rather well as little buggers. I mean, the ticks were not an issue as a young adult here in Canada. Obviously, they must be dispersing them. Here's another post of Valerie Ann Smith. Dr. Robert Malone confirms U.S. government dropped radioactive ticks on Americans as bioweapons. Declassified CIA documents proved infected ticks were deployed from low-flying C-130s over U.S. soil and sugarcane fields under JFK. Wow, back in the 60s. Plum Island, the Army's old biowarfare lab, just miles from Lyme, Connecticut, was ground zero. As usual. Okay, so from the last video, again, my mic died out, so it's a good thing I didn't carry on the show too much longer. From watching this video here, let's do this again, right? Robert Malone confirms U.S. government dropped radioactive ticks on Americans as bioweapons. Declassified CIA docs proved infected ticks were deployed from low-flying C-130s over U.S. soil and sugarcane fields under JFK. Plum Island, the Army's old biowarfare lab just miles from Lyme, Connecticut, was ground zero. Radioactively tagged tick, Lone Star ticks, hundreds of thousands released in Virginia in the 1960s, triggered the Lyme disease explosion we're still suffering from today. Lone Star ticks weren't even supposed to be here. Suddenly, they were everywhere, along with Lyme arthritis, rickettsia, babesia, and more. Coincidence? Malone says no. This was deliberate field testing of bioweapons using ticks and mosquitoes. Our own government turned American citizens into lab rats. Millions sick, lives ruined, doctors gaslighting patients for decades, while the cover-up continues. Heads must roll. Wake up, America. This isn't conspiracy theory anymore. It's declassified reality. Some more. Congressman Tim Burchett confirms on Joe Rogan that Bill Gates is behind the massive increase in ticks. Now we have a whistleblower who says pilots are being paid to drop ticks by aircraft. This matches accounts in America of tick boxes being found. We are paid to spread tick by air. It happens twice a year, early spring and early fall. This year, we hired to early. The company receives ticks box. Each box contains millions of ticks. Correct use are generally single or dual compressing pilot, and so one of the aspects that handles this purple hazel. Here we have the whistleblower saying that they are paid to disperse ticks across Canada. Now this sounds eerily familiar to what we're hearing about the boxes of ticks being found in America. Gates Foundation funded a biotech firm called Oxitec for research on genetically modified cattle ticks. Farmers claim to be finding boxes of ticks on their properties. Lyme disease cases are skyrocketing right at the time when a Lyme disease vaccine is actively in the works. So without the ticks, they can't sell the vaccines. You'll never guess who's making it. Pfizer and Valneva. Bioweapons. Do you get it now? Do you get what's happening? Do you get what's happening in our society and how they're making money and how they're using us to make money? It's not about humanity. It's not about the community. It's about profits. It's about big profits, right? And now, of course, Canada is being run by somebody whose job it was to basically just take over companies, raid them, make a bunch of money, and then leave a skeleton behind. And all the original investors, well, they lose their money. Another post by Valerie Ann Smith here. Weaponized ticks are here, and it's no accident. Bill Gates, the WEF, and their globalist scientists just got exactly what they wanted. A World Economic scientist, Dr. Matthew Liao, openly pitched human engineering to make people intolerant to meat, using the exact same mechanism as the Lone Star tick. Now those ticks are exploding across America. Result? Alpha-gal syndrome. You get bitten, and suddenly red meat, pork, poultry, eggs, and dairy trigger life-threatening allergic reactions. You're forced to go vegan. That's bad. That's really bad, man. Because we need cholesterol. Because without cholesterol, your body is going to shrivel up and die sooner than it needs to. You need cholesterol. And like one of the greatest sources of cholesterol are eggs. People that have really bad burns, like, you're talking like serious burns, they will put them on a diet of multiple amounts of eggs a day just to try to saturate you with cholesterol so your body has those building blocks. The numbers? In 2016, there were 34,000 cases. Today, it's over 450,000 Americans suffering, and it's skyrocketing every year. Coincidence? That hits right as they push eat the bugs. And climate lockdowns? Nope. This is the soft kill they've been planning all along. They're turning us into social pariahs for eating steak while they feast on whatever they want. This isn't nature. This is biological warfare disguised as climate solutions.
The Lone Star tick has made its way to California and infected over hundreds of people in the last few months with AGS, a rare disease that makes humans allergic to red meat and dairy, forcing them to go vegan, which is interesting considering a World Economic Forum scientist said this just a couple years ago.
About milk intolerance, and some people are intolerant to crayfish. So possibly we can use human engineering to make it the case that we're intolerant to certain kinds of meat, to certain kinds of bovine proteins. And there's actually analogs of this in life. There's this thing called the Lone Star tick, where if it bites you, you will become allergic to meat. I can sort of describe the mechanism. So that's something that we can do through human engineering. We can kind of possibly address really big world problems through human engineering.
That was Dr. Matthew Lau in 2016 when there was about 34,000 cases of AGS in the United States. Skip forward to today, there's over 450,000 Americans affected. How are they getting from Texas to California? Climate change. What is it ultimately going to help? Climate change. It's just crazy that this happened in Martha's Vineyard, where the global elites and WEF members vacation in the summer. Is this just an experiment or a coincidence? As always, let me know.
Wow. I gotta get a better laptop, obviously. So let's go across the pond. And of course, there was that big rally in the UK. So let's just listen to Tommy here, the organizer of the rally. Man, this man is based.
And if you become a prime minister tomorrow, what would you change?
I would stop Islam. I'd end foreign funding in this country. All the migrants would be taken out of the hotels and sent back tomorrow by the military. I would reverse. I would have remigration. It's time for many Muslims to leave this country if they're not going to integrate or assimilate. It's time to go home. Right? You've got your homes to go to. This is our home. We've got nowhere to go to. We're not allowing it to change any longer. You've seen today, people are fed up, man. People are fed up.
Fed up. National sovereignty, safety and security.
Yeah, we're fed up.
And national identity.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Massive crowds, all singing in unison, saying, Keir Starmer's a wanker. Keir Starmer's a wanker. All right, so let's go over here to Johannes M. Conrad post. To end the anti-immigration protests, Dutch police have received orders to start threatening mothers that their children will be taken away. You can see, for their safety, of course. I messaged one such mother yesterday, the one in the video below. Her husband was arrested and detained for 2 hours for being present at a protest. Just being present, just like the way they went after Canadians who were just, donating $10 or $20 to the freedom protest. She is terrified and won't be protesting again. Dutch media wrote about these family outings last week. The presence of women and children apparently threatens to normalize the far right. But it's the government that is radicalizing. The mayor of one town suggested to bring in the Dutch military to take over from the police. Police forces don't like it that the public have started to truly hate them. Of course they don't. The Dutch military is unionized, if you didn't know. Actually had the opportunity to not work with a couple, but we did hang out with a few of them for a bit out in Wilmington, where we were doing some training at a Boeing facility on the Chinook, the Model D Chinook. And of course, there were some Dutch folks there because they are operating the 6 Chinooks that we sold them. The old C model Chinooks that we had when I first joined the Air Force back in 1990. We were still flying those Chinooks, but they were just a plumbing nightmare when it came to hydraulics. There's too many breakpoints. What was it, 2,500 breakpoints or something stupid like that they had? Anyways, I think they reduced it down to just over 300. With the modification to the D model, along with some other changes to the aircraft. But that's where I already knew what the Dutch military was like, and it was interesting to finally meet them at the time. And of course, we still had standards in the military back then. So, our uniforms are well kept, our heads were, clean cut, and we were shaved, unless, of course, you had a chip. But these fellas were already growing long hair, acting lackadaisical because they were unionized. I wonder how well telling unionized military to go after your own citizens is going to go. Probably not too well. Probably not too well at all. Now, as you saw here was this story of this poor young fella here. 14-year-old German boy beheaded by Muslim refugee. In the photo, he proudly wears his father's hard hat, a yellow safety vest, and safety goggles. His hero is Bob the Builder. The construction sites had fascinated him since he was a child. Now, Germain, he was 14, from Memmingen, has been killed in a building slated for demolition by violence to the neck. That's what they call it. He entered an empty house where a refugee from Palestine was housing. He was beheaded. The killer managed to escape from the police 2 times. 2 times they lost track of him. When he was surrounded by police, he attacked them with a knife and was shot to death. German media is really silent about this. This is the country we are living in, where our youth gets their head cut off by illegal Muslim savages. That is a post by Raging Dissident. And there's a link here to the story. And it's not found. Indeed. Well, that link was working just before the broadcast. Are there other links? And some people are posting. Now, here's a story in Portuguese. Now, stop being lazy and do your research. Yeah, so it doesn't take long. And that's how it works pretty well on this social media platform, right? And of course, the liberals hate this. The liberals hate an open platform where people can just go in, give their links, give their references, show them the data that proves that whatever they're posting, whatever gaslighting they're trying to attempt, isn't going to work anymore. I think this is really part of what the Great Awakening is supposed to be. And as a reminder, right, we are wasting our time here in Canada, but we are wasting our time in order to make Mark Carney rich. Because his entire, well, I shouldn't say his entire, because he's also invested in oil, but a good chunk of his empire, his richness that he's manipulating the country for, is all based around net zero. And net zero fantasy only works if you believe in the climate scam. But, as the president reminded us here, after 15 years of Democrats promising that climate change is going to destroy the planet, the United Nations top climate committee just admitted that its own projections were wrong. Wrong. For far too long, climate activism has been used by Democrats to scare Americans, push horrible energy policies, and fund billions into their bogus research programs. Indeed. Where's all that carbon tax money? Oh, we got to invest. We got to put carbon into the ground. What a bunch of maroons. If you ask any of them, they probably don't even know what the concentration of that noble gas is. And really, it's plant food. And overall, the planet is not warm. We're still barely out of the last ice age. If you look at the warm periods that we've had in the past, the medieval warm period, the Roman era warm period, it was far warmer then than it is today. And besides, the warmer it is, the healthier it is for humans. The colder it is, the more people die because they need energy to stay warm. Well, that concludes the show for today. Thank you so much for coming out. We had a really good attendance out here on X. A lot of viewers, far more than what we are getting on our other channels. Once again, please, if you're interested in the garden, go on in and have a look at the garden in Rumble or YouTube. Every day we post the updates on the growth. It gets more exciting if you're into, growing plants and seeing private crops coming up through the ground. That's about it. That's about all the excitement. Unless, of course, we throw in some cooking or canning, which will come eventually as the season continues to grow. We will see you next time. Please like, share, subscribe. Bye-bye.